Movies! We're not sure if you know this, but a heck of a lot of work goes into them. The idea that first gets pitched to a studio executive might bear very little relation to what you eventually see. Scripts change, people are hired, fired, then rehired, then fired again. Everything is constantly in flux. And not even the most iconic and memorable characters just appear fully formed. They may go through many stages of design, and the final character often looks wildly different from the initial sketches. Here are 25 early concept designs for famous characters that will totally blow your mind. Everyone's favorite multi-layered ogre Shrek has become an icon, a meme, a cultural touchstone for a generation. And a big part of that is his instantly recognizable design, which strikes a delicate balance between ugliness and lovability. The version of the ogre from the original children's book is a good deal less visually appealing, but if you look at some of the early Dreamworks concept sketches, you could argue that they went too far the other way. For example, the design that was proposed back when Chris Farley was going to voice the character is a lot cuter and wackier than what we eventually got.
Thank you.
And Shrek with hair? It's just not quite right. Ultimately, you don't want this guy to look too adorable, because he is a monster after all. And this ain't Disney. Sticking with Shrek, and with totally inexplicable hair, did you know that in some of the unused concepts for Shrek Forever After, Donkey had hair? The idea of differentiating this version of Donkey from the version we recognize does kind of make sense. And we guess it's also a visual signifier that he's not taking care of himself, but hair? Look, just because this is an alternate reality, why would Donkey suddenly have a luxurious toupee? How does the existence or non-existence of Shrek impact so dramatically on Donkey's physicality? This is a real rabbit hole and not one we plan to get trapped in. Okay, way back in 1977, a strange little independent film called Star Wars turned a few heads. These days, every character design is so iconic it's often difficult for us to remember that George Lucas and his team threw out a lot of weird ideas during development. Legendary smuggler Han Solo, for example, went through a ton of different designs before Harrison Ford came on the scene.
It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
Ralph McQuarrie's original designs included a much more dapper Lando Calrissian-style scoundrel and a heavily muscled barbarian with bare arms. And even early drafts of Lucas's script had Solo as a weird green frogman. Yeah, we think it was the right decision to make him look like Harrison Ford. And what about a certain Wookiee? Well, like Han Solo, loyal co-pilot Chewbacca has become fully absorbed into popular culture. Your grandma knows his name, you can probably hear his roar in your head right now. But he wasn't always the big walking carpet we know and love. Early McQuarrie sketches depicted Chewie as a big, monkey-like creature, a strange troll with pointy ears, and various other shapes that were arguably not as appealing as his final form. Chewie is imposing, sure, but yo, he ain't hideous. Han Solo the Frogman and Chewie the Giant Monkey? Yeah, laugh it up, fuzzballs. Much like Shrek earlier in this list, B-Movie has become an increasingly surreal internet meme. And a big part of that, apart from the weird concept, is the strange design of Barry B. Benson. It's not exactly lovable, is it? It's kind of creepy, in fact. But the original concept sketches for the bees in B-Movie were very different. They looked more like cute, approachable cartoon bees than the strange bee-human hybrid we ended up with. If they'd gone with these cute early designs, would it have improved the movie? Would it still have become a meme? Would the idea of a woman and a bee going on a date have been more or less appealing? If anyone has access to parallel universes, multiverses, or interdimensional cable, please let us know. And speaking of parallel universes, there's some more early B-movie concepts that we can't resist sharing. See, at one point some deranged genius suggested that the bees might keep smaller insects as pets, with little collars and little leads. And sure, it's cute, it's kinda crazy, but for a movie that's very concerned with human exploitation of insects, it might have made the bees seem a little hypocritical. Oh, and there's also the early concept sketches for a Santa Claus of bees. Santa Bee. Yeah, that probably needs its own video. Pixar's final design for Buzz Lightyear is easily one of the most memorable of the last few decades. It hits a real sweet spot between retro and futuristic, paying homage to the classic B-movie sci-fi that its creators loved as kids while not being too cheesy. Which makes it fascinating to look at the early sketches where the 1950s influence was much more pronounced. The key to Buzz Lightyear's look is its timelessness, but the first drafts placed him firmly in the old-fashioned category. You can even see some of the early designs had LL on his chest, which stood for Lunar Larry, the character's original name. Woody and Larry. Yeah, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue like Woody and Buzz. Okay, we can argue all day tomorrow, and the next few weeks about whether the Trolls movie should have ever been made. But, for better or worse, it was made. And it's actually kind of interesting to look at the early concepts for the Trolls. They were pretty grotesque, leaning into the otherworld ugliness of trolls from fairy tales. But whether or not we think the movie should have been made in the first place, we would definitely say that the filmmakers were right to go cuter with the final product. The trolls in the movie look pretty faithful to the toys they're based on. Okay, done talking about trolls. What's next? Alright, let's get this over with. Believe it or not, the Emoji Movie had a development process. Shocking, I know. Different ideas were tried out by teams of creatives, and look, it's Hollywood. People need to work, let's not hold it against them.
Okay.
Even the emoji characters themselves went through a few iterations, and dare we say it, the final design was probably the best version? Some of the early sketches were much more cartoonish, with a lot more detail, which actually makes the emojis look weirder. We're gonna go out on a limb and say the cleaner, more minimalist final design is better, though obviously the word better is being used relatively here. Moving from piping hot cinematic garbo to sublime storytelling, everybody loves How to Train Your Dragon. Kids, adults, probably dragons. Part of the movie's appeal is its willingness to go darker than a lot of other kids' fare. There's some pretty intense stuff in the series, but looking at the early concept art, it seems that things could have been even darker. The terrifying water dragon, for example, probably could have given even adult viewers nightmares, let alone kids. Oh, and how about this gigantic demonic dragon beast? Yeah, it looks like something out of H.P. Lovecraft. Enjoy the therapy bills after exposing your kid to that abomination. Sticking with How to Train Your Dragon, cause why not, take a look at these early designs for Hiccup's wingsuit. The first concepts that the artists came up with were much more elaborate and scaly than the final version. Almost dragon-like, in fact. And while this would have looked pretty cool visualized on screen, we do wonder if the dragons would have appreciated it. After all, the book is about humans and dragons coexisting, not cosplaying as one another. Could it even be considered cultural appropriation? Please discuss. So, did you know that The Boss Baby was based off of, a book? Well, I certainly didn't, but thankfully I have the rest of the ScreenRant team to lean on because they did. Because it's our collective job to know these things. Not just our job, but our vocation, our passion. And interestingly, if you look at the original illustrations of the executive infant, the artists seem to lean much more towards the boss side of things rather than the baby aspect. Anyway, that's enough talking about the Boss Baby now. Oh, sorry, checking my notes here. We are unfortunately not done talking about the Boss Baby. Damn it. Of course, you remember from the movie The Boss Baby that the Boss Baby conducted his various business dealings from his bedroom. But some concept art shows that the Boss Baby could have had his own little house out in the yard. While that would have been fun, we're not sure that the Boss Baby's parents would have been into the idea of their infant child living in what's basically a dog kennel. Anyway, that is certifiably 100% definitely enough talking about the Boss Baby now. We're moving on to something I actually just covered here on the channel. Designing monsters for kids' movies is a tricky balance because you want them to be, monstrous, but not so monstrous that kids are going to be terrified of the main character. And as you can see from this Monsters, Inc. concept art, Sully originally looked much weirder and less friendly. Hard to imagine Boo, or audiences for that matter, falling in love with that guy. And while the finished Sully certainly could be scary, his cuddly personality and soft fur offset that very nicely. Not only was that fur a technical leap for Pixar, it was a better all-around creative choice. That's why those guys get the big bucks. Every so often, you get a year with 2 big volcano movies, or 2 big Mars movies, or 2 big asteroid movies. Or as in 1998, where we got those 2 big asteroid movies, 2 movies about ants. The color palette for ants was already a good deal darker and less colorful than A Bug's Life, which could be one of the reasons Pixar's effort is more fondly remembered. But as you can see from the early concepts, ants could have been even more muted and, frankly, more ugly than what we already got.
Sir?
Fun movie, but we'll take the cute purple ants over the sinister brown ones. Movies are full of unexpected success stories. I mean, who would have thought that a middle-aged English guy who loves cheese and his dog, both of them made out of clay, would have ended up as globally recognized box office superstars? Interestingly, Aardman's classic characters Wallace and Gromit looked quite different in early sketches. Gromit looked more traditionally dog-like than the wise and thoughtful character he ended up as. Hard to imagine him chasing a ball. Did you know there was even a very early plan to make him a cat? And, oh, is that Wallace with a mustache? Huh. We're glad he shaved it. So, anyone remember Turbo, the little snail that could? Did you know that they originally planned to make Turbo a sloth? I mean, yeah, that checks out. A creature traditionally thought of as being slow, gaining the power of speed, so hey, why not a sloth? Honestly, it's kind of odd that they ended up going with a snail, as sloths are far more cuddly. But hey, we're not here to second guess them. And as you can see from the concept art, the snail himself went through a bit of an evolution.
Santa Maria!
The genie from Disney's 1992 animated Aladdin is one of the most iconic characters in the history of the House of Mouse. But that design went through a bunch of changes during development, and some of them, well, just check out this nightmare fuel. A three-headed genie, a genie who looks like Slimer from Ghostbusters, a genie with a screen in his stomach like some kind of messed up mystical proto-Teletubby. Yeah, we're not sure even the late great Robin Williams could have made those designs lovable. Much like Shrek and Sully before him, the titular Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph needed to strike a very particular balance as a character. He had to look convincing as the big threatening antagonist from a game, but also be cuddly enough not to put kids off. The final design, we would say, achieved that, but as you can see, a lot of the early possibilities fell a little bit short. The strange, glum-looking guy with the tie, the monstrous bear, the spiky beast with wrecking ball hands. Yeah, kinda hard to imagine kids falling in love with any of those. Luckily, the guy who ended up on screen was just the right combination of intimidating and approachable. Alright, fun fact. Real-life pandas may look cuddly, but they're foul-tempered beasts, so we would not advise approaching them. Po from Kung Fu Panda, on the other hand, looks cuddly because he actually is. Though that wasn't always the case. See, early sketches of Po and his team looked more like something out of a dark and gritty graphic novel rather than the family-friendly movie we got. Just to reiterate, we do not advise approaching pandas, and we definitely do not advise teaching them Kung Fu. They will whoop your ass. Superman, as you probably know, has had a bunch of different looks over the years, both in the comics and on screen. The version we saw in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel was pretty different from the Christopher Reeve, Dean Cain, and Brendan Routh versions. But check out this concept art, because we could have gotten something even more radically different. The emo hair, no cape, the Black Death of Superman suit. Heck, it seems that at one point they even considered letting him keep his iconic red underwear. Rise of the Guardians villain Pitch Black was pretty creepy in the final movie, and we think you'll agree. But he could have been a lot more terrifying though, as you can see from the early designs. I mean, what even is that? A shapeless mass of darkness with screaming faces seemingly trapped in his black swirls? Ugh, even Cthulhu would run from that guy. Huh. Can Cthulhu run? There's a debate I'm looking to see unfold in the comments section. Let's be honest, nobody could have predicted that Despicable Me's minions would have become as popular as they have. And looking at the early designs for these strange little guys, it's kind of a miracle that they ended up looking like they did. As you can see, the minions started life basically as just little guys, in overalls, working in a factory. Would kids have wanted those on their lunchboxes? Probably not. The little guys slowly evolved into robots, then into odd hybrids of robots and man, until eventually settling on that bright yellow look. 90% of creativity really is just flailing around in the dark. Sonic the Hedgehog is probably the most infamous recent example of a bad early design, although in this case, somehow that design made it as far as the first trailer. But as you probably know, the fan backlash was so fierce that they redesigned him at the cost of, well, a lot. It's honestly kind of strange that this nightmare fuel Sonic got so far, because if you look at the concept art, he initially looked more like his familiar video game self. I mean, if it ain't broken, maybe don't try to fix it, because you might actually end up breaking it. Okay, is the DeLorean in Back to the Future a character? For the sake of this list, we argue yes. But did you know that the time machine was originally going to be a modified refrigerator rather than a car? It's true. Unfortunately, no official concept sketches of the time-traveling fridge exist, but it's pretty wild that it could have happened, had the studio not been concerned about kids climbing into their own refrigerators and getting hurt. Best to head off those lawsuits at the pass. And let's face it, that car was really cool. Besides, producer Steven Spielberg would eventually use the fridge idea in a later movie. Though, fortunately, to some degree, nobody is going to be imitating anything from that movie anytime soon. If there's one lesson to take from all this, it's that you should always try out a bunch of drafts of an idea before choosing your final one, because your final concept might be terrible. Great example that reminds me of one of my least favorite theatrical outings. Take a look at Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. Yeah, those designs definitely needed some workshopping. as did probably the entire thing. Look, there's a great book on it by the guy who wrote The Thing, Glenn Berger. It's called Song of Spider-Man, the inside story of the most controversial musical in Broadway history. It's a fantastic read. God, that show is a train wreck. Boy Falls from the Sky was actually pretty good, though.